Check. All right, it's 2016 and we are back. Back here on our regular schedule at the Hammer Factor. We got a lot of your messages, certainly appreciate those. Wondering where we were at and when we were going to get our asses back in gear. Well, we're back. Now, if you like our show or want us to cover any certain topics, maybe want to hear an interview from your favorite athlete, learn about your destination you want to go paddling or whatever it is, let us know. Send us a message and we will get it done. We love our viewer mail. All right, we're back. Let's get into this week's show. We got some good rants and raves, Luke Hopkins, conservation updates with Lewis. Here we go. You guys ready to fire this up?
Yeah.
Let's light this candle.
All right, we're back. I'm not sure what episode of Hammer Factor this is. It's been a little bit since we've done one. It's been vacation time. I believe 2 of our 3 hosts have been out of the country. The other was on a 2-week trip to the Grand Canyon. So we're happy to be back in the studio. And my name is John Grace. I'm the show producer. On the handle, we have Lewis Geltman, poker champion, policy counsel for the Outdoor Alliance, and North Fork champion. Lewis, how's it going?
Doing well.
Welcome.
It's from Chile last night and feeling good.
Oh, you just got back last night?
Yeah, I'm at my mom's house here in Maryland. Just got in yesterday in D.C. for a couple days and then back to the snowy Northwest.
All right. And also on the horn, we have John Weld, co-founder of Immersion Research and legendary whitewater kayaker. John?
Hello.
How you doing?
Good. It's good to be back. You know, a little, 4 or 5 day break, and we're back.
Yeah, it was like a 4-week break, and I don't know
wow.
if I should be if we should be flattered by this or how we should take it, but we got about a dozen kind of little hate mails. People wondering where their podcast was, so at least we have 12 people listening.
Yeah. I did notice, among the podcasts I listened to, there was a bit of a hiatus over the holiday, so I don't feel like we were too out of time with that.
No, we missed a couple, but, whatever.
All right, well.
So
we have great shows lined up, I should say.
We do. We have a good show lined up. On this show, we have Luke Hopkins. I'm not sure how to quite define Luke Hopkins, but longtime paddler, entrepreneur, OneWheel SUP professional. The list kind of goes on and on there. But before we get into that, Lewis, tell me about your trip to South America. I had no idea you were even going to South America, so welcome back.
It was sweet, man. It was awesome. I feel like sometimes I get a little bit jealous with all the folks in the gorge. Everybody's always kind of just rolling in or out to or from somewhere exotic and rad. And one of my buddies, Nate Klama, invited me kind of last minute to go down and meet him and some other folks for Baker and a few days on the Fuda, which is somewhere I'd always kind of wanted to go. And it was cool down there. Have you been down there, Weld or Grace?
I've been down there for my honeymoon.
I've been to the Fuda, but I've never been down to the Baker.
Baker is sick. It was
it's the middle of nowhere. I mean, you gotta take a bit of a drive to get there.
It was probably like 14 hours south from Fuda, probably paved about a third of the way. But sort of like, probably between 30 and 50,000 CFS.
Oh, big.
Yeah, super big. I don't know, sort of the obvious comparison, I guess, is like the Stikine, but it felt like quite a bit bigger and less controllable, but also maybe a little bit more forgiving. Like there weren't kind of the horrible wedge holes and places that you just absolutely couldn't be. It was more just like consistently massive whirlpools and seams and eddy lines, and that was kind of what it seemed like created the hazards. But it was cool. Like I felt like it was not really possible to have like super consistent lines down there. It was like kind of like no matter what you did, you were gonna go for a big ride at some point or another. As long as you kind of stayed in your boat and stayed cool, it was going to work out at the bottom. But
so trip report, how many days you're on the water? How many miles is it? What's the the general logistics.
One day, doing like probably 3.5 hours. It's pretty much roadside, although it doesn't really feel that way being in southern Chile and whatnot. I was down there. I guess I ran it 3 days, but Nate Klima, Sam Grafton had been down there a little while previously, and they ran it like 10 days straight. Not 10 days straight, but I think they got 10 runs, which is probably more than my nerves would necessarily be up for. But
makes my shoulders hurt.
It was cool.
Well, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks, man.
All right, so there's been some interesting conservation news floating around. You care to touch on anything? Anything that you've seen out there?
Been happily out of touch for the last couple weeks, but there's a confirmation hearing tomorrow for Ryan Zinke, the Montana congressman who's nominated to be the head of the Department of Interior. So that'll be interesting. I think I'm gonna, as soon as we get done recording here, I'm gonna put together a letter to the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, who holds those confirmation hearings, and I'll probably go down and watch the hearing tomorrow since I'm in DC. So that'll be interesting.
So you'll be in the room where it's actually happening?
Yeah, it's like I've actually never gone to a hearing in Congress before, but I mean, I think it's like kind of I don't know, you can watch it on C-SPAN or whatever, but it's, the senators will kind of be at the front of the room and they'll be questioning Zinke sitting at the desk or whatever. And then there's, space in the back for everyone to sit and hang out and watch. It's sort of like, I don't know, a courtroom or something like that.
Can you wear an LVM T-shirt to the thing and maybe get some press, like photo bomb, like a reporter or something?
Can you go in and ask what's their favorite episode of the Hammer Factory? Like, can you go to the senators and be like, "So, which is your favorite episode? Did you like?"
If I see anybody who's liable to know what the hell we're talking about, I will ask them, but probably not call that. Maybe we can make some Hammer Factory lapel pins or something like that, wherever that. Suits to appropriate occasions. I don't know.
Well, all right. So Trump, I think the big thing about Trump is sort of the level of unknown. I mean, it's just a lot of unpredictability, but he's certainly made, his cabinet and his appointees are becoming more well known. Where do we stand as paddlers? What are the things we need to be looking out for?
Tell me about this Montana guy. What do you know about it?
Yeah. Have we talked about this already? Not really.
I think I don't remember.
So Zinke has been on, I guess we talked about this a little bit the last time about kind of like the committee structure with Congress, about how there, some people in Congress are more important than others for our issues. And Zinke has been one of those people. He's the congressman from Montana. He's on House Natural Resources, which means they kind of take a first cut at any legislation that has to do with natural resources stuff. So he's voted on a lot of things that are really important for us. And he's been kind of a mixed bag. Like, he's said some really good things about keeping public lands public. He's, taken some votes that have, bucked his party and have bucked the committee chairman to vote on things in a way that we would want him to. So that's been really good. He's also taken some really bad votes. He's been a big proponent of coal development on public lands.
Oh.
Generally I'd say he's been kind of a mixed bag, but
do hunters and fishermen in Montana have sway over his opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. He has a really good relationship with some of the hunting and angling organizations who are really supportive of his nomination. It's not who we would have gotten under a Clinton administration, but given sort of the standards by which we're going to be judging these, nominees for all sorts of things, I think that we've done pretty well. I don't think that, he's not Scott Pruitt, the EPA nominee who doesn't believe in climate change and basically works for the fossil fuel industry in Oklahoma.
Is he the vaccine denier too? Who's the vaccine denier?
So
that's Kennedy.
Bizarrely is, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who actually founded Waterkeeper Alliance.
Yeah, that's so weird.
He's done like a lot of really good things, but apparently he's also kind of out to lunch. I don't know what to make of the vaccine stuff.
I did a Grand Canyon trip with him. That's just such a weird thing to. So let me shift gears here real quick, and this kind of affects you, John. And there's been this initiative to move the outdoor retailer show out of Salt Lake City due to some pushes by some Utah representatives to open up some of the recently designated public lands to mining access, things like that. I believe Patagonia is a big push behind this from the headline that I saw. What have you guys heard about that? And what do you think of moving the outdoor retailer show, Weld?
Well, for the uninitiated out there, Outdoor Retailer is the industry's largest trade show, the outdoor industry's largest trade show. It happens twice a year, once in the summer, once in the winter. And the reason why many consumers may not know about it is because it's basically between manufacturers and store owners. And while it sounds kind of niche and like kind of a local small trade show, it's actually huge. I mean, it brings in millions upon millions of dollars into Salt Lake City every year. And in the past, public officials from Utah have fought very hard to keep that show there. And I guess now it's in jeopardy. For me, it doesn't matter. I mean, I don't want to get too behind the scenes on this, but paddle sports actually looks like it's leaving the outdoor retailer show, which is a mistake in my opinion, but that's maybe a conversation from somewhere else. But I mean, I think this is interesting for me because this will be a good we'll get to see how much influence the outdoor industry has. You know what I mean? Because there is, I mean, it's a ton of money that comes into that show. I mean, Lewis, what do you know about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that the Utah congressional delegation and the state of Utah have, they obviously benefit tremendously from outdoor recreation through tourist spending, through all the equipment manufacturers that are located in Utah, through a retailer. And at the same time, they have this congressional delegation and these state leaders who are really pushing hard to, take over federal public lands, which, we talked about it a little bit briefly a little bit before, but if the states take over the federal public lands, they're immediately going to be saddled with all of the management costs that are currently borne by the entire country. And the result is that they're going to immediately have to massively ramp up resource extraction, user fees, and potentially just sell off public lands outright. So it's this terrible, terrible idea, really threatening to everyone who enjoys public lands. And the state of Utah has been talking about suing the federal government to take over the public lands, which is kind of a baseless legal theory, but they're still making noise about it. Their representatives in Congress have been pushing legislation that would turn over public lands to the states, and that Congress actually could do, which is a huge threat. And
why are these people pushing for this? I mean, what's the upside for them if suddenly Utah is saddled with
it's got to be private interest.
Yeah, I mean, it's oil and gas industry. It's a handful of people who have this sort of ideological opposition to the federal government, and think that we're going to run it better, and we don't want anybody in Washington D.C. telling us what to do. But at the same time, it's these lands like national forests, BLM lands, they belong to everyone. Like, you and I are just as much owners of the public lands in Utah as the people who live in Utah, and that's just how it is, and it's they belong to all Americans in common, and we all pay the cost of managing them together, and they belong to everyone, not the state of Utah to use as a way to make money. And so people in the outdoor industry for a long time have said we've kind of had it with the state of Utah, who benefits so much from our presence here and from public lands in general, taking all these positions that are contrary to our interests. And if you guys are going to continue taking these positions and working against the outdoor industry in a public policy setting, then we're going to move our trade show. And as John was saying, it's something that brings an unbelievable amount of money to Salt Lake City every year. So, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with that. It seems like, in a way, that the power of that moving the trade show like that exists in the threat to do it. Once they actually did it, I'm not sure that it's gonna help anything. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen.
It'd be easy to call that bluff, but it wouldn't take much. I mean, I think there's probably a half a dozen companies who go to Outdoor Retailer who could pretty much sway that decision, if Patagonia and North Face and Black Diamond and a handful of others pulled out.
Yeah, I mean,
I guess they'd probably go to Denver or something. I don't know.
I wonder how much money I've spent at an outdoor retailer show.
I know. I mean, IR alone has spent deep six figures over the past 18 years. Not deep, but certainly six figures. You know.
Well, moving on. I think our best course of action is to get on a newsletter, make your voice heard. There's all kinds of options to write to your local representative. I know that in the past 2 weeks, I have sent more letters and made more phone calls to local representatives than I have probably in my entire life. So maybe that's happening all over the place. I think that's the course of action at this point.
It's good. Make sure your AW membership is up to date. Get on OA's mailing list, and we'll let you know what to do.
All right, so now we're going to move to our celebrity guest. And while I'm patching in our celebrity guest, John, why don't you take a second to tell our audience a little bit about who we're getting on the phone here?
I should probably let Luke really flesh out these details. Luke Hopkins is a DC paddler who's been around the paddling scene for a while. I think he was one of IR's first athletes, or one of the top, first 3 or 4 athletes that we had on board. He was definitely there for the playboating heyday of the late 90s. And he went on to do well, here he is.
Luke, are you there?
Yeah, how you guys doing?
Good. Welcome to the show. You're on the phone with John Weld, Louis Geltman, and John Grace, and welcome to the Hammer Factor. Thanks for coming on, Luke.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, Luke, how's it going, man?
Good. How you doing, Louis?
Good.
So,
all right, this is gonna be a bit like a Senate confirmation hearing. There's gonna be some very difficult questions. Well, quite frankly, going to be offensive and challenging.
Well, hang on. Just a second before we get on that. Luke, we were going to have you last week, but you were out at the Consumer Electronics Show. Tell us a little bit about what is the Consumer Electronics Show? What were you doing out there?
Well, the Consumer Electronics Show is kind of where these giant companies like Apple or GoPro or Samsung and everything in between, they're coming together to launch all their new and latest products and features, and that is the cutting edge of innovation in electronics. And there's everything from ridiculous massage chairs that cost $20,000 to a device that you wear on your face that makes it so you can sleep for 20 minutes and it feels like 3 hours. Whether that's hocus pocus or not, there's everything in between, including a lot of flying drone-like devices as well.
How big is this show? Put a scale on how big the area you're walking around is.
It's in multiple buildings, so the Las Vegas Convention Center is known as like the biggest convention center ever, it seems like, and it doesn't even all fit in that convention center. So there's multiple convention centers, and it's probably the size of maybe 20 Walmarts, and is full of all sorts of mind-blowing little things. But I was actually out there launching the latest version of OneWheel, which is the self-balancing off-road board sport crazy vehicle that's been all over the SUP industry and the outside industry.
So wait, let's back up for a second, because it's been sort of a long and winding road from where you started in DC as a paddler back in the 50s and 60s to doing this OneWheel thing now. And I was saying before you came on, you're a DC paddler, and you were, I think, one of the very first IR athletes. Is that right? Does that sound right?
I think I was the first IR athlete. I was friends with one of the early employees, Eric Brooks, and
that's right.
He brought me into the fold with you guys. And so that's kind of where it all started.
This was back in the boom, the playboating boom of the 90s, right?
Yeah.
What do you I mean, you sound skeptical about that. I mean, what's your recollection of that time in the sport?
Well, it was like it was an exciting time. I was really young, and the sport was like this. I hadn't been in the sport long enough to realize like how significant that time period was. And looking back, I realized that that time period actually was somewhat insignificant in the sense that that boom didn't really last. But it was a great time for a lot of innovation to happen and a lot of new products and new competitors in the marketplace. I mean, I think what you guys have done at IR in addressing like more stylish gear and better gear is a lot of what was happening back there in that boom. Every kayak company wanted to make more stylish kayaks and more competitive and higher quality products. And that boom kind of drove everyone to do just that.
Yeah, there was a time just before that era, like in the early 90s, where if you wanted a dry top or a paddle jacket, it was blue or black. Or I think like Stolquist had like a teal one. That was
Teal.
like the most outrageous choice you could make.
I had a teal and purple dry suit as my first dry suit and dry top.
I did too.
Exactly.
It had felt around the collar. It was.
Yeah, I had one of those.
Style.
And then, at one point, it like the peak of the frenzy, we got this crazy idea to put together a poster we'd send out to our customers. And it was a ridiculous project. So we hired a photographer, and what we did is we had Luke. We rented a bunny costume, like a full like gigantic head fur bunny costume, and Luke paddled Great Falls. He paddled the spout of this thing. It was like dead of winter too, because there was ice in the picture, right? Like all over the banks. We had Luke paddle Great Falls several times with his bunny head on his head. And then, Luke, I'm sure you remember this, right?
Oh yeah, and every time I ran the drop, it felt like my head was getting ripped off because it actually was getting ripped off.
Yeah. The head probably weighed 40 or 50 pounds at least when it was soaking wet.
Yep, it was pretty funny. It was definitely a moment of disbelief that it was actually working. And paddling up to the lip of that drop with that giant bunny head on, it had these little screens of the eyes, so you actually looked through like these screens that had the eyeballs painted onto, and the littlest bit of water filled in those screens, and it made it completely blind to paddle. So they were always partially filled in, and I was looking through like the screens that actually didn't have water in them.
And we'd yell down. We'd be like, "We need to do it again!" And you'd hike up back over the thing with that bunny head. And then for some reason, that bunny costume made it, I think, like around the country. There's a bunch of footage of the bunny head, like in Skook and a bunch of other places.
Oh yeah, it was a fun, comical thing to kind of bring back to life every once in a while. And people, I've walked in, bathrooms in restaurants in small paddling towns, even in the last 12 months, and seen that poster on the wall.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so moving along.
Wait. Okay, go ahead, John. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, you got it.
So one other thing, Luke, that stuck out to me. A long time ago on the Russell Fork, I saw you in a C1, but with a kayak paddle. Whatever happened to that? I just remember you just crushing it at that little wave hole there at the takeout, and it just being super dynamic. And I was like, oh man, that could be something. Whatever happened with that? Just personal curiosity.
Well, it was I have kind of lower back problems. And I'm not very flexible. Like I can't touch my toes, and probably never will. And so when I was in some of these kayaks, as a kayaker and competing in freestyle, that lack of flexibility was like made certain things like pretty challenging. And I really appreciated the position of C1, but who doesn't appreciate having two paddle blades? Yeah. I mean, that's just. So I appreciated the fact that I could actually, I was more flexible in a C1. I could lay forward on the boat a lot better. So I kind of just took what I was good at in C1 and in position, and then took the knowledge that I had in actually holding a kayak paddle with two blades and how to use it, and combine the two. And like the first major controversy that came up was at the U.S. team trials, where I pretty much read the what classifies a kayak, and it was pretty much you just have to have two paddle blades. And so I competed at the U.S. team trials with a C1 with a really low saddle, and never said anything to anybody as I like went out there and used a kayak paddle blade, and it was totally awesome. I had like the highest scoring rides of the event, and I was like, well, this is going to cause a big problem.
What happened?
There was a huge controversy, and then Christine Jackson actually argued internationally for me to be able to go to the World Championships, and she actually won that argument. And then I didn't go because I thought Australia seemed like a really long ways to go paddling, so I didn't go. But good job, Christine. Thank you for making that very strong argument.
Yeah, I just remember it being super dynamic, and just the rotation and the kind of the torque you could get on the boat it was obvious that that there was something there. I always kind of thought, especially in the freestyle realm, that maybe it'd catch on, but I guess it never did.
Sometimes
I think you just need more people pushing it and more controversy. And the thing about it is, I think we're still somewhat operating in a traditionalized sport, and you need a pretty strong like entire brand push to kind of change the game of any sport that has a lot of traditional roots in it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess the thing for me is I see how much fun all the C1ers I know have constantly outfitting their boats, and I'm just like, man, I'm playing that.
I look at them crawl out of the boat like at the end of the day, and I'm like, I want that.
Okay, all right, we gotta move on, guys. All right, John, keep us moving here.
Quickly, let's talk about how you got to SUP, because you started doing stride ride at some point during your career here. What led up to that?
I grew up with board sports, and I was snowboarding and riding a skateboard when I was a kid, and breaking all sorts of bones. And then I got into kayaking, and I think my parents were really happy about that at a young age, because water is not that hard typically, and I wasn't getting hurt, and I was having a lot of fun. But at the root of it, I really did love board sports. I like being on my feet. I like balancing, snowboarding, kiteboarding, all of those board sports. So I went from kayaking to involving a little bit of kiteboarding into the mix. And then SUP was kind of the perfect blend for me, because I'm a board sport guy from my childhood, but paddle sports, I love having a paddle. And so SUP was like that board sport with a paddle.
So let's get to the red meat here. I'm going to make an analogy that like drones at CES are like SUP at Outdoor Retailer. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
Like the past 3 or 4 years at Outdoor Retailer, it seems like there's 10 to 50 new SUP companies getting pushed farther and deeper into the tents and throughout the show. And if you talk to like a paddle sports executive, they're looking at SUP as more or less the savior to paddle sports. What are your thoughts on that as a business, as an industry? Do you think we have a boom going on here, or do you think the sport has some legs, or what's going on?
The sport definitely has some legs. When you see everyday people who've never held a kayak paddle, or obviously a stand-up paddle, and they get on a stand-up paddleboard, you can see it authentically in the way they experience it and the way they talk about it. That experience, that customer experience, is what is going to keep legs underneath this industry for a long time. But as with any industry that comes out of nowhere, it is having like, new consumer first product growth, and that is getting to some maturity in a lot of ways, and it's going to turn into a little bit of a industry that is going to have to be maintained by brands that actually have compelling products that promote that authentic experience, and not just Me Too products. I mean, what if the kayak industry had 400 kayak brands, and that's kind of what's going on in SUP. There's 400 brands out there, and there's new brands coming online all the time, and they don't realize that there's 400 brands out there. If they did, they probably wouldn't be doing what they're doing.
Now, when you say 400 brands, are you being literal in 400 brands, or there's like a lot of brands? How many brands?
I think there's over 400 brands now.
Listen to that number, 400
And
brands.
how many board manufacturers are there in the world, do you reckon? Like 6?
As far as I would say as far as
like in Asia, because I have a picture in my mind of most of these boards coming out of the same 6 to 10 factories in Asia somewhere.
No, I would say there's 25 to 30 board manufacturers right now, but if you ask me the same question in 5 years, I'd say there's 15 to 20, and then 10 years from now, I'd say there's 5 to 10. It's just the board manufacturing business is a little bit like the actual brands. Everyone wants to make something, and so it's a little bit of the same.
I don't know, Geltman, what's your take on this?
On the long-term sustainability of SUP?
Yeah, just as a sport.
I'm just not close enough to it to say, but it seems to me like given that most of the market is beginners and is going to be beginners forever, it's going to get to be it's going to get to a point where the biggest competition for new SUP manufacturers is going to be Craigslist, right? It's like open canoeing. It's like if you want an open canoe, you do not need the new open canoe to go paddle flat water with your kid and go fish for sunfish, right? It's like you just go find one on Craigslist or buy a Coleman canoe. And it seems to me like that's going to be the biggest problem for the viability of SUP as a long-term business. But I'm not close enough to it to say. That's just my general impression.
I think you're right. I do think the canoeing analogy actually is pretty accurate in a lot of ways. If I was going to go buy a canoe, I would search Craigslist probably before I searched anything else. The way people use a paddleboard, from laying on it, sunbathing, to jumping off and going swimming and jumping back on it, that is one of the most compelling things about its kind of mass appeal, is that it's really just a platform of just trying to have fun, even if it's just at your lake house. And that's where I think it has a lot of legs underneath of it. Is that?
But I think the retail value for that kind of product is, I'd pay $100 for that kind of product. You know what I mean, or 150. Yeah,
and I think that's actually what's happening in the industry. The industry is trying to drive the consumer is in the industry are getting driven to a lower price point. I think making boards over $1,000 right now is a daunting prospect and is very high risk.
What do you think about Confluence, making SUP boards? Obviously, I think they're more brand aware. Do you think that's a dicey proposition for them to get into this market? Should this be really just better handled by the people going right to Dick's and Costco and things like that? Or what do you think about that?
Well, I think Confluence is coming in fairly late in the game. If they had established themselves in the very beginning and had the mentality of Jake Burton, which would have been about 6 or 7 years ago, they could have been the ski industry and they could have been the snowboard industry all right there in the beginning. But now they're kind of coming in later, and I think they're going to have a harder time than they think. And They got 5 years of drinking the Kool-Aid that once they get into SUP, it's going to be a cakewalk. Well, they just jumped into the housing market at the wrong time.
Right.
That's what I think.
What do you think as far as your general outdoor retail, your general outdoor paddle shop, picking up SUP? Are they? Is it a good business model for them, or are they going to bring in a bunch of inventory and there's going to be super similar products offered at larger box type stores or whatever at half the price? Is there an edge between those two?
Yeah, I think that there is an edge, but you have to be careful what you bring in and what brands are marketing the product well to facilitate sell-through. And I'm sure Weld understands that to a significant degree. Like, you don't want to put IR in the wrong type of store that doesn't have the demographic that's actually desiring the brand. And I think the same applies in SUP, that you have to make sure to have strong brands that have the marketing legs behind it and place them in the right retail environment. And it's going to yeah.
No, I mean, you have SUP in the ocean, which to me is where it came from, and it makes a tremendous amount of sense there. Taking an SUP board out in the waves is really, really quite fun, and it's engaging, and it makes sense right off the bat. When you get inland, I mean, and that's a whole different industry than what we do. People talk about that as paddle sports, but to me, it's as different as surfing is to paddle sports, at least as a gear manufacturer. But as you get inland, it gets to be a little bit more difficult, because I think the people who are taking boards out on lakes and stuff like that, they're the ones who are going to go to Dick's or Costco's or Craigslist as this thing evolves, I think. And then you have these weird places, like I know my friends at CKS Main Street, like Fred and crew, and they're selling a tremendous amount of these expensive boards to people who are paddling whitewater rivers in these, which is, like, to me, like a uniquely Colorado phenomena, where you have these outdoor enthusiasts engaging in these high-end, difficult sports that are like the dream consumer. And you have a few pockets of that around the country, where a retail environment for SUP, like a retail specialty store, makes a tremendous amount of sense, But if I was in Oklahoma City and looking at carrying SUP boards, I'd be thinking more of a rental program than I would be in terms of retail.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. You're totally right.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Whitewater SUP. Personally, I think that moving whitewater Class 1, Class 2, Class 3 is a lot of fun on an SUP. Weld hates it. Let's talk about that. Why are you so anti the whitewater SUP, John?
I'm not anti the whitewater SUP. Let's make that clear. I think where my frustration comes from is the number of times we get approached by people saying that we should make gear for whitewater SUP, not realizing how small of a sport that really is, and how by and large we're all kayakers, and I'll just sell them kayaking gear and they'll use it on the river, and how a vast majority of the people doing whitewater SUP are getting gear for free anyway, or as a pro deal as an athlete or something. But that's my frustration, is sort of contending with people imagining it overtaking whitewater kayaking, as a sport, which we hear, a surprising amount.
Interesting. I didn't.
Maybe not overtaking, but is like a legitimate booming sport.
Yeah, whitewater SUP is like a very small niche sport, and I think it can sustain like some whitewater SUP actual boards, but not from 400 companies, maybe from like 2 or 3. Yeah. And
but you go to Buena Vista and you spend like 2 weeks in Buena Vista and you start to think otherwise, because it seems like the entire town is like 3 generations of people are out on SUP boards surfing. You know what I mean? I mean, Nana's out there shredding the wave.
Yeah, I think you're right. But making specific, those whitewater SUP boards, a number of them, you can just go paddle anywhere. And I think that applies to making whitewater SUP gear, like dry suits and stuff like that. Don't make it for whitewater SUP. Make it for whitewater, and SUPers will, start using it by default. It doesn't,
That's right.
It doesn't have to be made for their niche. Their niche is just too stinking small for, commercializing it in that way.
I mean, you took an SUP board on the Gully, didn't you, there, Mr. Grace?
Yeah, long time
How'd
ago.
that go?
I swam a few times, but I did pretty good.
Once or twice?
Maybe
2 times, you think?
Until I got tired. I was doing pretty good. Like, I kind of just rode it on my knees through some
Where'd
of
you
the
get tired? Like initiation?
I mean, I didn't swim. I stood up through a lot of the rapids. You know what? I'm going to put a picture. I almost made it through Sweets Falls, and there's photographic evidence of it. I made it all the way. I almost made it without that thing sliding out from it. Anyway, this isn't about me. Let's talk about this is my one thing about SUP and why I'm a believer in it. is that I can't get my wife to go kayaking on the French Broad with me if I had to, but I can say, hey, let's take the boards and let's go for a cruise down to downtown, and she's up for it every time. So
There you go.
whatever that means or how that equates to stores or sales or what retailers has it, that makes me believe in it and its long-term sustainability. So that's all I got. We put on an event, the Battle of the Broad. Luke and I put on the world's first OneWheel Derby World Championship. And let's use that as a segue into OneWheel. What is
Hold
OneWheel?
on for a second. Wait for 1 sec. Geltman, do you see a lot of SUP out in the gorge? I guess you do, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of people out doing downwinders on the Columbia, which looks pretty fun.
What's a downwinder?
Yeah, basically you're going upstream on the Columbia, but downwind, and you get these big swells out in the river in the summer, like overhead, I think, for a surfer. And I don't know, there's a lot of like surf skis out there, especially like we have like a big surf ski race in the summer, but there's also a lot of guys out doing downwinders on SUPs, and people are fired up about it. It sounds.
You could take a SUP down the Tross or something like that.
It's
I'm
kind of happening.
I'm definitely in the Weld camp on the appeal of Whitewater SUP. I keep thinking how appealing it would be to like take a pair of rollerblades out to like the mountain bike trail system behind my house.
You guys are such haters. Oh my god! All right, let's let Luke talk.
We're
It's
pure.
awesome.
Let's just put it that way.
So let's hit up the downwinder experience. It's kind of like whitewater kayaking is a regular kayaking. You know, you're out there in open water in big swells. You're surfing the swell for, maybe 30% of the experience. So you're just out there surfing on these big swells going downwind. I mean, it's actually pretty awesome.
It looks pretty fun. I've seen some videos, some guys doing that with foils.
Yeah.
And that looks really compelling, actually.
So like the whole foil inception is while it's working on waves via Laird Hamilton many years ago, in downwinding experiences, people are getting up on foil and foiling around in open water with just a little bit of a wind swell, and they're up and foiling for, I saw a video of a guy going for almost 3 minutes. That's like surfing for 3 minutes out there in open water. That's pretty amazing. And also, you're starting to see guys on SUPs on a foil coming off a wave in the ocean and then pumping the foil in a full circle and catching the next wave coming in and never coming off foil. I mean, there's some pretty cool stuff going on in the SUP industry. While that's, foil SUPing is never going to be mainstream, it's actually exceptionally dangerous, and I've hit myself with my own foil multiple times. It's still pretty awesome.
Maybe we should make a dry suit just for foil
Oh,
SUP.
Jesus, Weld.
Yeah, you better put some protection on it because, like, those foils, like, they will mess you up.
All right, we got about 15 minutes here. I want to jump into the OneWheel. So, Luke, what's a OneWheel, and tell us a little bit about your involvement with the company.
So OneWheel is it's an electric board sport. Most people want to say, oh, that's kind of like an electric skateboard, but it really isn't. It's a giant wheel in the center of a board. You're in the surfing, snowboarding, skateboarding stance, and it can go off-road, on-road, through trade shows. It makes trade shows way more fun, and it makes single-track mountain biking trails really fun. And so it is self-balancing. And it has an app where you can actually adjust the settings and shape the experience to make it feel more like surfing and turning on your back foot by keeping the nose up higher. And that's called elevated mode. Or you can put it in extreme mode, and it feels like kind of riding a snowboard on a groomer super fast. And then you can put it in a beginner mode, which I sometimes do for my kids that are really young, 5 and 7 years old. So when they ride it, it has a governed speed to keep them from like just going super fast and crashing. It's super fun. I mean, it's just another board sport in the quiver of sports. It's not some halo sport. It's not super extreme or anything. It's accessible. It's attainable for everyday people to have a board sport feeling in 2 minutes or less, whether it's in their driveway or in the parking lot of a retail store.
Now the OneWheel, I remember when they first came out, and now there's a second version. Correct me, this is the second version that just released.
Yeah, the second version is called OneWheel Plus,
Wow.
and it has some enhanced features, and it will be actually available to purchase. It's available to purchase now, but the first ones will be coming off the production line in late February.
So originally, when the first OneWheel came out, I saw it, got on one. I was like, "Oh man, that's cool!" And I was like, maybe I'll get one of those. And then I was kind of thinking this was like a $300-400 device, and it turned out it was $1,100. I think was their retail cost, and I kind of, I wasn't hating on it, but I kind of thought, well, I don't know if that's ever going to be a thing. I don't know if that's going to catch on. Well,
that's not the price we would pay, John. Luke, of course, would help us out with a what?
Yeah, the retail price is $1,500.
$1,500. Okay.
And for us, it would be what, closer to $400 or $500? You think? Or
it's $14.99 for you guys. We got a $1 deal.
But regardless, if they're on to version 2, there must be some sticking power. Southern Raft Supply in town here is selling through crates of these things. So Justin tells me, how did that happen, Luke?
It's if you look at a OneWheel and somebody tells you the price, you'd be like, that is crazy. I'll never buy that thing. The difference is it's customer experience. They're buying an experience. It's not just buying a product. And it's an experience that they don't know. And once they have it, they're going to say something like, wow, this thing feels like I'm snowboarding, or feels like I'm kind of riding in powder, or something like that. They have this unique response to the product. And then that starts to build value. So the experience has a lot of value. And the components in a OneWheel are pretty expensive components. I mean, I'm talking about this thing Bluetoothing to your phone and shaping the way it actually rides, and the speeds and the power. So there's a lot in there that most consumers don't realize. And once they do, it has more value. But that's where Justin at Southern Raft Supply, he rides it, and he gets people on a OneWheel to have that experience. That's why, and so he's just spreading the feeling, and that feeling is what's selling it.
I guess that was the thing. The thing I've noticed about it is when I first saw it, I was like, that looks pretty cool. And then Graham Seiler got a OneWheel, and he is definitely the gorgeous foremost OneWheel enthusiast. And I sort of like noticed, I saw that he got it, and I was like, that thing looks like fun, but it also like looks like something that you're gonna be over it in like a week and wish you hadn't spent $1,500 on that. And that, like, it doesn't really seem like that's what's happened. I mean, he seems stoked on it. He's still out riding it all the time. I've hopped on it a little bit. It's pretty fun. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't have $1,500 to spend on a OneWheel, but it does seem like the people who buy them aren't just like putting it in the closet after a week and deciding they're over it. They're stoked on it.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to a trade show in Florida in 2 weeks, and I'm like looking forward to getting to the trade show. I'm looking forward to getting around the trade show. I'm looking forward to going out to dinner, and I have a buddy down there that is crazy about playing golf on a OneWheel. And last time I was down in Florida, we went and played golf riding OneWheels, and I'm not a huge golf fan, but man, a OneWheel makes golf a lot more fun. And I'm actually going to go down there and play golf with this guy. And so like, I'm looking forward to all these little things that typically you might walk or take an Uber to go do, or drive your car. But a OneWheel can make some of those. It makes getting there, more than half the fun.
Do they give you a hard time about taking the OneWheel on a golf course?
We pretty much worked out a deal with this one golf course to go play golf. They're pretty cool, and I haven't actually had any issues. I've played a couple other times in other parts of the world, and I've never had anybody say you can't do that. I mean, it actually has this big wide tire, and a golf course is a really fun place to go ripping down a fairway, carving. I mean, you're like carving down the middle of a golf course. I mean, yeah, it's pretty fun.
It does sound pretty good.
And you got your clubs on your back and the whole 9 yards. You're just
Yeah, clubs on the back, and yeah. And the thing is,
dude, you got to get a picture of that. I want to see a picture of that. I think
there's a video. There's actually a video on YouTube that's about the last time we played. It's pretty funny.
Very cool. Well, OneWheel. Weld, you ever one-wheeled?
Yeah, I've used Luke's a couple times at CCAS, a couple other places. They're fun. I'm in the same camp with Lewis. You know, I think they're a lot of fun, and certainly, you know, if I had $1,500 in disposable income, I'd go out and drop it. You know, but I think about like where we live in Morgantown, where we live, you know, where every row is at a 20-degree, you know, pitch, 20% grade. You know, I'm not sure how practical it would be, but I don't know.
Well,
we'll talk about our pro deal price after we get off the show here, and we'll maybe see how much that makes after
hammer
that.
Factor pro deal here, some sort of percentage.
Yeah, we can just negotiate that right now. It's $14.99, and
how sick are you? How sick are you of getting pro deal requests from paddlers, like on a 1 to 10 scale?
That's why I compromise right away and just say $14.99. We can make it happen.
Right.
But you know, on the that's one thing. So think about this. It's like riding a skateboard and riding down a hill on a skateboard for the average person. That is a scary prospect. And a OneWheel can go up about 25 to 30% grade, but when it goes down a hill, it governs your speed and recharges, and you can't ride too fast. It actually will slow you down no matter how steep that hill is. And so it has some kind of surprises that I think consumers don't even realize when they actually buy it. And one of the most compelling things that blew up OneWheel was when the first boards were delivered to customers. They could only go about 10 miles an hour, and then an app was launched, and people were able to update their firmware, and they all of a sudden had a board that had all these other features that they didn't even realize existed. And it's almost like going to buy a Volkswagen Jetta, and then all of a sudden there's a firmware update and you have a Porsche. It was pretty cool. The happiness you saw from customers was pretty awesome.
So what do you do for OneWheel, and how many of these things has OneWheel sold?
OneWheel sold thousands of these.
How many thousands?
Less than 100,000, and more than 10. And I am the sales manager, and I kind of oversee a little bit of like kind of brand management and direction on some level. And Kyle Dirksen is the CEO and founder, and he's he created OneWheel because he has an electrical engineering background and he loves to snowboard, and he tried to marry the two things a little bit.
So let's use this as a quick segue into a person that we know who's doing not a similar product in any way, but maybe about to experience a similar business model. Is our friend Jimmy Blakeney doing the inflatable balance board, right? So we're talking about Dirk, who has an electrical engineering degree, making these OneWheels. Jimmy's just released this inflatable balance board, I guess a Kickstarter. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Kumo board. Do you know anything about that or what he's doing? I mean, you know something about making inflatable SUP boards for sure, right?
Yeah. So the Kumo board is a inflatable balance board, and it has a lot of pretty cool features through adjustability of pressure of the actual roller and the actual board. Mm-hmm. There's I believe in things that challenge your balance. I like that about SUP and Whitewater SUP even more. And with OneWheel, it challenges your balance a little bit. And Kumo board is kind of like a trainer of balance, I think. So there's a lot of cool things about Kumo board, and I can see people like getting it and learning how to do it in the easiest lower pressure mode, and then getting better on it. And maybe later in life, those people won't break their hip going down the steps because they'll just have better balance, or maybe they'll be better at snowboarding because of it. Who knows?
So what obstacles is Jimmy going to face here? I mean, he's starting out. You know, when I see Kickstarter, I don't know anything about Jimmy's business or his experience in doing this, and building these things. But I think sometimes these things start with an idea, but then there's a huge hurdle of manufacturing involved. I mean, do you think he's going to, what, if you were to give him advice in that regard, what would you say?
Based on looking at the board, he's gotten over a number of obstacles in manufacturing to get prototypes to fruition. When it comes to scaling manufacture in the inflatable business and hitting price point targets, I think that's one of the most challenging things, and I think there'll be a challenge for him for scaling it into the retail business, but in the direct sale business, and if he only stays in that realm, he'll be able to have a great product for consumers to use. But I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is just making sure the business works across all channels of manufacturing and distribution.
So why not, and I'm not saying this to disrespect retailers in any way, because I fully understand the strength of a retail network, but why does OneWheel not just go direct and cut those prices on those boards by some double-digit percentage?
The business model of OneWheel is more built around direct sales, and if it was built around retail, at this point, it would actually cost over $2,000.
So OneWheel is built around direct sales. That's your eventual target channel.
No, it's built around direct sales because it started a lot like Kumo Board. It started on Kickstarter, and then quickly realized that retailers play a really, really important part in getting the brand out there. They do, because they can, Justin at Southern Raft Supply can put people on OneWheels. OneWheel.com can't put people on OneWheels. And so having the experience creates customers. And so, the retail model came second, and it hasn't been a very profitable model for OneWheel, but we've maintained it to be profitable for the retailer. And as the business scales up and does more volume, the cost to build of a OneWheel will ultimately come down even more, and will make retail more profitable. And so does that kind of make sense?
So you're saying the margins
it seems tight.
Yeah,
it seems tight.
I mean, we got a great. Honestly, we have a for the cost to build on a OneWheel, we have an exceptionally compelling retail price.
Yeah, but someone's getting pinched in there. It's either you or the retailer. If you're doing a wholesale price in there.
Yeah. Well, the retailer's making a pretty good margin and moving through boards, and we're surviving at wholesale, but the direct sale business was where it all started for OneWheel. It was like great. It's like Kumo Board, great idea, going out there and seeing if it's got some legs underneath of it, and obviously it did.
Well, the thing I see like with a Kumo board is I think it's a cool product, and if Jimmy figures out his production, it's a cool thing. But there's nothing that doesn't keep 15 different people from making a Kumo board, but the thing about OneWheel is it seems pretty technologically. It seems like it would be hard for someone else to jump in and get it right. I believe there was the one little knockoff thing that had the two wheels and they all caught on fire, and
there's a whole fleet of quote unquote hoverboards out there made by various manufacturers. But you guys must have some IP on what your product, right, Luke?
Yeah, so there's quite a bit of IP on utility and design with OneWheel, and I think Kumo Board. I think Jimmy has some sort of IP related to it.
It's intellectual property.
Yeah, intellectual property patents that relate to the Kumo Board, and so I think he'll be able to protect it on some level. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, we're about to our time limit here on the show, and normally we jump into a Rants and Raves section here at the end. Luke, have you ever heard any of our podcasts, or do you know about the Rants and Raves?
I have no idea, actually.
Well, we all pick out a rant, something we really love or we want to dote on, or we pick out a rave, something we're into, or a rant, something we want to kind of complain about a little bit. Anything on your head you'd like to rant or rave about?
I don't know. Maybe John will have an idea for me.
I don't know. For you, I have a hard enough time with myself. Well, Geltman, let's start with you. Surely you have a rant or a rave. You've been out in the field for 2 weeks with gear. Product that really came together for you.
I have a rant. This is something that I've been thinking about for quite a while.
All right.
There's a notion that
Let's
I
get
would
off
really
your
like to disabuse our listeners of.
All
And
right.
that is that there is some sort of connection between how badly your gear smells and how hardcore of a paddler you are. People are out there taking this perverse pride in smelling like the Grim Reaper's grundle. And I would like to share that is not the hallmark of being a hardcore paddler. That makes you someone who has not mastered the basics of personal hygiene.
Right. I'm going to actually jump on that rant and say that when you send in this nasty smelling gear to IR for repair and it's soaking wet and obviously not taken care of in any way, shape, or form, is not cool. And not cool at all.
If
and we open a box sometimes, it smells like a cadaver, and I'm not kidding.
And I have these 2 cats, and my gear bag was peed on by one of those cats. And I don't think that makes me hardcore. I think that makes me negligent of my gear.
Yeah. If you're like on the road for a month and you smell terrible, you get a pass. If you are paying rent and have access to a washer and dryer and you haven't washed your gear in a month, you need to rectify that immediately.
Yeah, and don't send it to IR like that either. Do not.
Very good. All right, rant on stinky gear. That seems to be a 3-way across the board rant on that. So I'm going to rave on a piece of gear, and this is going to be a plug for John Weld, so I'm sure his ego is going to pop here. But
thank you.
I just got back from the Grand Canyon and was with a group of 7 good friends, and I had a Royal Flush spray deck, and I've raved on this piece of gear before, but I just want to rave on it again because we were doing about 30 miles a day in the Colorado River Splish Splash, and I would get to camp or get out to lunch, and I would have virtually no water in my boat, and I paddled the exact same rapids, exact same river with a bunch of people who had different kinds of spray skirts, and their boats were soaked. So there we go. Royal Flush spray skirt.
Jump on that just a second. How confidence inspiring having that skirt is on somewhere like the Baker. Like just going into these massive rapids with these huge, crassing, unpredictable features, and knowing that your skirt's going to stay on is like essential.
That's good to hear. You guys have no idea how thankless of a job making branded spray skirts are. It is a never-ending struggle and battle. So that's good. I'm glad people are out there enjoying them.
That was fully unsolicited, and it's pretty cool. My boat was dry, and
Luke, do you want to say anything nice about IR gear while you're here?
Oh Jesus, we're cutting it off. This isn't. You're getting an invoice, Weld.
I think John Weld in IR has had a how can attitude in trying to make better gear. And not saying we can't, not saying never. And that's definitely something I appreciate about immersion research.
I think this is great.
Oh, Jesus.
We should do a whole show on just different aspects of how good IR gear is.
Well, I'm also going to rant that you have a Royal Flush on the front of this spray skirt. But
it's actually called the Royale. I don't want to be a stickler.
It's
called a Royal.
That's what I'm going to say. I'm going to rant on the name. The name is Royale. It's the Royal Flush.
Yeah.
That's just what it is. Fix your website, fix your order forms, whatever you got going on. All right, guys. Luke, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on. Very, very interesting stuff there about the OneWheel and your thoughts on the SUP.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Are you going to be in Asheville for the Battle of the Broad this year?
I'm planning on it, and it should be fun. I really enjoyed doing the OneWheel derby that involved the beverages and the powdered donuts.
All right, sweet. Well, I guess that concludes our show. And to all of our listeners out there, there's anything you'd like to hear or anything you'd like to comment on, feel free to send us a message. We always like our viewer feedback, and we will be back on schedule with a very special guest next week.
That's right. And then send your hate, river running SUP people, send your hate mail to John Grace.
God. If
you can find him on Facebook.
You know what? Let's just go ahead and let's just do a tally. Love or hate, just comment. Do you love it or do you hate it to Whitewater SUP? And we're gonna lay this one to rest, Weld, because I think love it's gonna outweigh it.
All right.
All right, everybody. Have a good day.
Cheers.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
See you
guys.
Bye.